Visions of the Daughters of Albion by William Blake. The argument. I loved Theotormon, and I was not ashamed. I trembled in my virgin fears, and I hid in Lutha's veil. I plucked Lutha's flower, and I rose up from the veil, but the terrible thunders tore my virgin mantle in twain. Visions. Enslaved, the daughters of Albion weep, a trembling lamentation upon their mountains, in their valleys sighs toward America. For the soft soul of America, Owathawon, wandered in woe along the vales of Lutha, seeking flowers to comfort her, and thus she spoke to the bright marigold of Lutha's vale, Art thou a flower? Art thou a nymph? I see thee now a flower, now a nymph. I dare not pluck thee from thy dewy bed. The golden nymph replied, Pluck thou my flower, Owathawon the mild. Another flower shall spring, because the soul of sweet delight can never pass away. She ceased and closed her golden shrine. Then Owathawon plucked the flower, saying, I pluck thee from thy bed, sweet flower, and put thee here to glow between my breasts. And thus I turn my face to where my whole soul seeks. Over the waves she went in winged, exulting, swift delight, and over Theotormon's reign took her impetuous course. Bromion rent her with his thunders. On his stormy bed lay the faint maid, and soon her woes appalled his thunderous horse. Bromion spoke. Behold this harlot here on Bromion's bed, and let the jealous dolphins sport around the lovely maid. Thy soft American plains are mine, and mine thy north and south. Stamped with my signet are the swarthy children of the sun. They are obedient, they resist not, they obey the scourge. Their daughters worship terrors and obey the violent. Now thou mayst marry Bromion's harlot and protect the child of Bromion's rage, that Owathawon shall put forth in 9 moons' time. Then storms rent Theotormon's limbs. He rolled his waves around and folded his black jealous waters round the adulterate pair. Bound back to back in Bromion's caves, terror and meekness dwell. At entrance Theotormon sits, wearing the threshold hard with secret tears. Beneath him sound like waves on a desert shore, the voice of slaves beneath the sun, and children bought with money, that shiver in religious caves beneath the burning fires of lust that belch incessant from the summits of the earth. Owathawon weeps not, she cannot weep. Her tears are locked up, but she can howl incessant, writhing her soft snowy limbs and calling Theotormon's eagles to prey upon her flesh. I call with holy voice, kings of the sounding air, rend away this defiled bosom, that I may reflect the image of Theotormon on my pure, transparent breast. The eagles at her call descend and rend their bleeding prey. Theotormon severely smiles. Her soul reflects the smile as the clear spring, muddied with feet of beasts, grows pure and smiles. The daughters of Albion hear her woes and echo back her sighs. Why does my Theotormon sit weeping upon the threshold, and Owathawon hovers by his side, persuading him in vain? I cry, Arise, O Theotormon, for the village dog barks at the breaking day. The nightingale has done lamenting. The lark does rustle in the ripe corn, and the eagle returns from nightly prey and lifts his golden beak to the pure east, shaking the dust from his immortal pinions to awake the sun that sleeps too long. Arise, my Theotormon, I am pure, because the night is gone that closed me in its deadly black. They told me that the night and day were all that I could see. They told me that I had 5 senses to enclose me up, and they enclosed my infinite brain into a narrow circle and sunk my heart into the abyss, a red, round globe, hot, burning, till all from life I was obliterated and erased. Instead of morn arises a bright shadow like an eye in the eastern cloud. Instead of night, a sickly charnel house. But Theotormon hears me out. To him the night and morn are both alike, a night of sighs, a morning of fresh tears. And none but Bromion can hear my lamentations. With what sense is it that the chicken shuns the ravenous hawk? With what sense does the tame pigeon measure out the expanse? With what sense does the bee form cells? Have not the mouse and frog eyes and ears and sense of touch? Yet are their habitations and their pursuits as different as their forms and as their joys. Ask the wild ass why he refuses burdens, and the meek camel why he loves man. Is it because of eye, ear, mouth, or skin, or breathing nostrils? No, for these the wolf and tiger have. Ask the blind worm the secrets of the grave, and why her spires love to curl round the bones of death. And ask the ravenous snake where she gets poison, and the winged eagle why he loves the sun. And then tell me the thoughts of man that have been hid of old. Silent I hover all the night, and all the day could be silent if the Atormon once would turn his loved eyes upon me. How can I be defiled when I reflect thy image pure? Sweetest the fruit that the worm feeds on, and the soul preyed on by woe. The new-washed lamb tinged with the village smoke, and the bright swan by the red earth of our immortal river. I bathe my wings, and I am white and pure to hover round Theotormon's breast. Then Theotormon broke his silence, and he answered, Tell me, what is the night or day to one o'erflowed with woe? Tell me, what is a thought, and of what substance is it made? Tell me, what is a joy, and in what gardens do joys grow? And in what rivers swim the sorrows? And upon what mountains wave shadows of discontent? And in what houses dwell the wretched, drunk with woe, forgotten and shut up from cold despair? Tell me where dwell the thoughts forgotten till thou call them forth. Tell me where dwell the joys of old, and where the ancient loves, and when will they renew again, in the night of oblivion past, that I might traverse times and spaces far remote and bring comforts into a present sorrow and a night of pain. Where goest thou, O thought? To what remote land is thy flight? If thou returnest to the present moment of affliction, wilt thou bring comforts on thy wings, and dews and honey and balm, or poison from the desert wilds, or the eyes of the envier? Then Bromion said, and shook the cavern with his lamentation. Thou knowest that the ancient trees seen by thine eyes have fruit, but knowest thou that trees and fruit flourish upon the earth to gratify senses unknown, trees, beasts, and birds unknown, unknown, not unperceived, spread in the infinite microscope, in places yet unvisited by the voyager, and in worlds over another kind of seas, and in atmospheres unknown? Are there other wars beside the wars of sword and fire? And are there other sorrows beside the sorrows of poverty? And are there other joys beside the joys of riches and ease? And is there not one law for both the lion and the ox? And is there not eternal fire and eternal chains to bind the phantoms of existence from eternal life? And Owathawon waited silent all the day and all the night. But when the morn arose, her lamentation renewed. The daughters of Albion hear her woes and echo back her sighs. O Urizen, creator of men, mistaken demon of heaven, thy joys are tears, thy labor vain to form men to thine image. How can one joy absorb another? Are not different joys holy, eternal, infinite, and each joy is a love? Does not the great mouth laugh at a gift, and the narrow eyelids mock at the labor that is above payment? And wilt thou take the ape for thy counselor, or the dog for a schoolmaster to thy children? Does he who contemns poverty, or he who turns with abhorrence from usury feel the same passion, or are they moved alike? How can the giver of gifts experience the delights of the merchant? How the industrious citizen the pains of the husbandman? How different far the fat-fed hireling with hollow drum who buys whole cornfields into wastes and sings upon the heath. How different their eye and ear. How different the world to them. With what sense does the parson claim the labor of the farmer? What are his nets and gins and traps, and how does he surround him with cold floods of abstraction and with forests of solitude to build him castles and high spires where kings and priests may dwell? Till she who burns with youth and knows no fixed lot is bound in spells of law to one she loathes. And must she drag the chain of life in weary lust? Must chilling, murderous thoughts obscure the clear heaven of her eternal spring, to bear the wintry rage of a harsh terror, driven to madness, bound to hold a rod over her shrinking shoulders all the day and all the night, to turn the wheel of false desire and longings that wake her womb to the abhorred birth of cherubs in the human form, that live a pestilence and die a meteor and are no more. So the child dwell with one he hates, and do the deed he loathes, and the impure scourge force his seed into its unripe birth, ere yet his eyelids can behold the arrows of the day. Does the whale worship at thy footsteps as the hungry dog? Or does he scent the mountain prey because his nostrils wide draw in the ocean? Does his eye discern the flying cloud as the raven's eye? Or does he measure the expanse like the vulture? Does the still spider view the cliffs where eagles hide their young? Or does the fly rejoice because the harvest is brought in? Does not the eagle scorn the earth and despise the treasures beneath? But the mole knoweth what is there, and the worm shall tell it thee. Does not the worm erect a pillar in the moldering churchyard, and a palace of eternity in the jaws of the hungry grave? Over his porch these words are written: Take thy bliss, O man, and sweet shall be thy taste, and sweet thy infant joys renew. Infancy, fearless, lustful, happy, nestling for delight and lapse of pleasure. Innocence, honest, open, seeking the vigorous joys of morning light, open to virgin bliss. Who taught thee modesty, subtle modesty, child of night and sleep? When thou awakest, wilt thou dissemble all thy secret joys, or wert thou not awake when all this mystery was disclosed? Then comest thou forth a modest virgin, knowing to dissemble with nets found under thy night pillow, to catch virgin joy and brand it with the name of whore, and sell it in the night in silence, even without a whisper and in seeming sleep. Religious dreams and holy vespers light thy smoky fires. Once were thy fires lighted by the eyes of honest morn. And does my Theotormon seek this hypocrite modesty, this knowing artful secret, fearful, cautious, trembling hypocrite? Then is Owathwan a whore indeed, and all the virgin joys of life are harlots. And Theotormon is a sick man's dream, and Owathwan is the crafty slave of selfish holiness. But Owathwan is not so. A virgin filled with virgin fancies, open to joy and to delight wherever beauty appears. If in the morning sun I find it, there my eyes are fixed in happy copulation. If in evening mild, wearied with work, sit on a bank and draw the pleasures of this freeborn joy. The moment of desire, this virgin that pines for man shall awaken her womb to enormous joys in the secret shadows of her chamber. The youth shut up from the lustful joy shall forget to generate and create an amorous image in the shadows of his curtains and in the folds of his silent pillow. Are not these the places of religion, the rewards of continence, the self-enjoyings of self-denial? Why dost thou seek religion? Is it because acts are not lovely that thou seekest solitude where the horrible darkness is impressed with reflections of desire? Father of jealousy, be thou accursed from the earth. Why hast thou taught my Theotormon that accursed thing, till beauty fades from off my shoulders, darkened and cast out, a solitary shadow wailing on the margin of nonentity? I cry, love, 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 happy, happy love, free as the mountain wind. Can that be love that drinks another as a sponge drinks water, that clouds with jealousy his nights, with weepings all the day, to spin a web of age around him, gray and hoary, dark, till his eyes sicken at the fruit that hangs before his sight? Such is self-love that envies all, a creeping skeleton with lamp-like eyes watching around the frozen marriage bed. But silken nets and traps of adamant will Owathwan spread, and catch for thee girls of mild silver or of furious gold. I'll lie beside thee on a bank and view their wanton play and lovely copulation, bliss on bliss with Theotormon. Red as the rosy morning, lustful as the firstborn beam, Owathwan shall view his dear delight, nor e'er with jealous cloud come into heaven of generous love, nor selfish blightings bring. Does the sun walk in glorious raiment on the secret floor, where the cold miser spreads his gold, or does the bright cloud drop on his stone threshold? Does his eye behold the beam that brings expansion to the eye of pity, or will he bind himself beside the ox to thy hard furrow? Does not that mild beam blot the bat, the owl, the glowing tiger, and the king of night? The sea-fowl takes the wintry blast for a covering for her limbs, and the wild snake the pestilence to adorn him with gems and gold, and trees and birds and beasts and men behold their eternal joy. Arise, your little glancing wings, and sing your infant joy. Arise and drink your bliss, for everything that lives is holy. Thus every morning wails Owaphawin. The Theotormon sits upon the margin ocean, conversing with shadows dire. The daughters of Albion hear her woes and echo back her sighs.
The shadowy daughter of Urthona stood before Red Orc. When 14 sons had fatally journeyed o'er his dark abode, his food she brought in iron baskets, his drink in cups of iron. Crowned with a helmet and dark hair, the nameless female stood, a quiver with its burning stores, a bow like that of night, when pestilence is shot from heaven. No other arms she need. Invulnerable though naked, save where clouds roll round her loins, their awful folds in the dark air, silent she stood as night, for never from her iron tongue could voice or sound arise, but dumb till that dread day when Orc essayed his fierce embrace. Dark virgin, said the hairy youth, thy father stern, abhorred, rivets my tenfold chains, while still on high my spirit soars. Sometimes an eagle screaming in the sky, sometimes a lion stalking upon the mountains, and sometimes a whale I lash the raging, fathomless abyss. Anon a serpent folding around the pillars of Urthona, and round thy dark limbs on the Canadian wilds I fold. Feeble my spirit folds, for chained beneath I rend these caverns. When thou bringest food, I howl my joy, and my red eyes seek to behold thy face. In vain these clouds roll to and fro and hide thee from my sight. Silent as despairing love and strong as jealousy, the hairy shoulders rend the links. Free are the wrists of fire. Round the terrific loins he sees the panting, struggling womb. It joyed. She put aside her clouds and smiled at her firstborn smile, as when a black cloud shows its lightnings to the silent deep. Soon as she saw the terrible boy, then burst the virgin cry. I know thee, I have found thee, and I will not let thee go. Thou art the image of God who dwells in darkness of Africa, and thou art fallen to give me life in regions of dark death. On my American plains, I feel the struggling afflictions endured by roots that writhe their arms into the nether deep. I see a serpent in Canada who courts me to his love. In Mexico, an eagle and a lion in Peru. I see a whale in the South Sea drinking my soul away. Oh, what limb-rending pains I feel. Thy fire and my frost mingle in howling pains. In furrows by thy lightnings rent. This is eternal death, and this the torment long foretold. A prophecy. The guardian prince of Albion burns in his nightly tent. Sullen fires across the Atlantic glow to America's shore, piercing the souls of warlike men who rise in silent night. Washington, Franklin, Payne, and Warren, Gates, Hancock, and Greene meet on the coast glowing with blood from Albion's fiery prince. Washington spoke. Friends of America, Look over the Atlantic Sea. A bended bow is lifted in heaven, and a heavy iron chain descends, link by link, from Albion's cliffs across the sea to bind brothers and sons of America. Till our faces pale and yellow, heads depressed, voices weak, eyes downcast, hands work bruised, feet bleeding on the sultry sands, and the furrows of the whip descend to generations that in future times forget. The strong voice ceased, for a terrible blast swept over the heaving sea. The eastern cloud rent. On his cliff stood Albion's wrathful prince, a dragon form, clashing his scales. At midnight he arose and flamed red meteors round the land of Albion beneath. His voice, his locks, his awful shoulders, and his glowing eyes appeared to the Americans upon the cloudy night. Solemn heaved the Atlantic waves between the gloomy nations, swelling, belching from its deep red clouds and raging fires. Albion is sick, America faints, and rage the zenith grew. As human blood shooting its veins all round the obrid heaven, red rose the clouds from the Atlantic in vast wheels of blood, and in the red clouds rose a wonder o'er the Atlantic Ocean. Intense, naked, a human fire, fierce glowing, as a wedge of iron heated in the furnace. His terrible limbs were fire with myriads of cloudy terrors, banners dark, and towers surrounded. Heat, but not light, went through the murky atmosphere. The King of England, looking westward, trembles at the vision. Albion's angel stood beside the stone of night and saw the terror like a comet, or more like the planet Red that once enclosed the terrible wandering comets in its sphere. Then Mars, thou wast our center, and the planets three flew round thy crimson disk. So ere the sun was rent from thy red sphere, the spectre glowed, his horrid length staining the temple long with beams of blood. And thus a voice came forth and shook the temple. The morning comes, the night decays, the watchmen leave their stations. The graces burst, the spices shed, the linen wrap it up. The bones of death, the covering clay, the sinews shrunk and dried, reviving shake. Inspiring mood, breathing, awakening, spring like redeemed captives when their bonds and bars are burst. Let the slave grinding at the mill run out into the field. Let him look up into the heavens and laugh in the bright air. Let the enchanted soul, shut up in darkness and in sighing, whose face has never seen a smile in 30 weary years, rise and look out. His chains are loose, his dungeon doors are open, and let his wife and children return from the oppressor's scourge. They look behind at every step and believe it is a dream, singing. The sun has left his blackness and has found a fresher morning, for the fair moon rejoices in the clear and cloudless night. For empire is no more, and now the lion and wolf shall cease. In thunders ends the voice. Then Albion's angel wrathful burnt beside the stone of night, and like the eternal lion's howl in famine and war replied, Art thou not Orc, whose serpent form stands at the gate of Enethermon to devour her children? Blasphemous demon, antichrist, hater of dignities, lover of wild rebellion, and transgressor of God's law, why dost thou come to angels' eyes in this terrific form? The terror answered, I am Orc, wreathed round the accursed tree. The times are ended, shadows pass, the morning begins to break. The fiery joy that Urizen perverted to 10 commands, what night he led the starry host through the wide wilderness. That stony law I stamp to dust, and scatter religion abroad to the 4 winds as a torn book, and none shall gather the leaves. But they shall rot on desert sands and consume in bottomless steeps to make the deserts blossom, and the deep shrink to their fountains, and to renew the fiery joy and burst the stony roof. That pale religious lechery, seeking virginity, may find it in a harlot, and in coarse-clad honesty, the undefiled, though ravished in her cradle night and morn. For everything that lives is holy. Life delights in life, because the soul of sweet delight can never be defiled. Fires enwrap the earthly globe, yet man is not consumed. Amidst the lustful fires he walks, his feet become like brass, his knees and thighs like silver, and his breast and head like gold. Sound, sound, my loud war trumpets, and alarm my 13 angels. Loud howls the eternal wolf. The eternal lion lashes his tail. America is darkened, and my punishing demons terrify it, crouch howling before their caverns deep, like skins dried in the wind. They cannot smite the wheat, nor quench the fatness of the earth. They cannot smite with sorrows, nor subdue the plow and spade. They cannot wall the city, nor moat round the castle of princes. They cannot bring the stubborn oak to overgrow the hills. For terrible men stand on the shores, and in their robes I see children take shelter from the lightnings. There stands Washington, and Payne, and Warren, with their foreheads reared toward the east. But clouds obscure my aged sight, a vision from afar. Sound, sound, my loud war trumpets, and alarm my 13 angels. Ha, vision from afar. Ah, rebel form that rent the ancient heavens, eternal viper self-renewed, rolling in clouds. I see thee in thick clouds and darkness on America's shore, writhing in pangs of abhorred birth. Red flames the crust rebellious and eyes of death. The harlot womb, oft opening in vain, heaves in enormous circles. Now the times are returned upon thee, devourer of thy parent. Now thy unutterable torment renews. Sound, sound, my loud war trumpets, and alarm my 13 angels. Ah, terrible birth, a young one bursting. Where is the weeping mouth, and where the mother's milk? Instead, those ever-hissing jaws and parched lips drop with fresh gore. Now rolled round in thy clouds, thy mother lays her length outstretched upon the shore beneath. Sound, sound, my loud war trumpets, and alarm my 13 angels. Loud howls the eternal wolf, the eternal lion lashes his tail. Thus wept the angel voice. And as he wept, the terrible blasts of trumpets blew a loud alarm across the Atlantic deep. No trumpets answer, no reply of clarions or of fifes. Silent, the colonies remain and refuse the loud alarm. On those vast shady hills between America and Albion's shore, now bared out by the Atlantic Sea, called Atlantean Hills, because from their bright summits you may pass to the golden world, an ancient palace, archetype of mighty emperors, rears its immortal pinnacles, built in the forest of God by Ariston, the king of beauty, for his stolen bride. Here on their magic seats the 13 angels sat perturbed, for clouds from the Atlantic hover o'er the solemn roof. Fiery the angels rose, and as they rose, deep thunder rolled around their shores, indignant burning with the fires of Orc. And Boston's angel cried aloud as they flew through the dark night. He cried, "Why trembles honesty? And like a murderer, why seeks he refuge from the frowns of his immortal station? Must the generous tremble and leave his joy to the idle, to the pestilence that mock him? Who commanded this? What God, what angel? To keep the generous from experience till the ungenerous are unrestrained performers of the energies of nature. Till pity is become a trade, and generosity is science that men get rich by, and the sandy desert is given to the strong? What God is he writes laws of peace and clothes him in a tempest? What pitying angel lusts for tears and fans himself with sighs? What crawling villain preaches abstinence and wraps himself in fat of lambs? No more I follow, no more obedience pay. So cried he, rending off his robe and throwing down his scepter in sight of Albion's guardian. And all the 13 angels rent off their robes to the hungry wind, and threw their golden scepters down on the land of America. Indignant they descended headlong from out their heavenly heights, descending swift as fires over the land. Naked and flaming are their lineaments seen in the deep gloom. By Washington and Payne and Warren they stood, and the flame folded, roaring fierce within the pitchy night before the demon red, who burnt towards America in black smoke, thunders and loud winds, rejoicing in its terror, breaking in smoky wreaths from the wild deep, and gathering thick in flames as a furnace on the land from north to south. What time the 13 governors that England sent convene in Bernard's house? The flames cover the land, they rouse, they cry. Shaking their mental chains, they rush in fury to the sea to quench their anguish. At the feet of Washington, down fallen, they grovel on the sand and writhing lie, while all the British soldiers through the 13 states sent up a howl of anguish, threw their swords and muskets to the earth, and run from their encampments in dark castles, seeking where to hide from the grim flames and from the visions of Orc, in sight of Albion's angel, who, enraged, his secret clouds opened from north to south, and burnt outstretched on wings of wrath, covering the eastern sky, spreading his awful wings across the heavens. Beneath him rolled his numerous hosts. All Albion's angels camped, darkened the Atlantic mountains, and their trumpets shook the valleys, armed with diseases of the earth to cast upon the abyss, their numbers 40 millions mustering in the eastern sky. In the flames stood and viewed the armies drawn out in the sky, Washington, Franklin, Payne and Warren, Allen, Gates and Lee, and heard the voice of Albion's angel give the thunderous command. His plagues, obedient to his voice, flew forth out of their clouds, falling upon America as a storm to cut them off, as a blight cuts the tender corn where it begins to appear. Dark is the heaven above, and cold and hard the earth beneath. And as a plague wind filled with insects cuts off man and beast, and as a sea overwhelms a land in the day of an earthquake, fury, rage, madness in a wind swept through America. And the red flames of Orc that folded roaring fierce around the angry shores, and the fierce rushing of the inhabitants together. The citizens of New York closed their books and locked their chests. The mariners of Boston dropped their anchors and unlaid. The scribe of Pennsylvania casts his pen upon the earth. The builder of Virginia throws his hammer down in fear. Then had America been lost, overwhelmed by the Atlantic, and earth had lost another portion of the infinite. But all rushed together in the night in wrath and raging fire. The red fires raged, the plagues recoiled, then rolled the way back with fury on Albion's angels. Then the pestilence began in streaks of red across the limbs of Albion's guardian. The spotted plague smote Bristol's, and the leprosy London's spirits, sickening all their bands. The millions sent up a howl of anguish and threw off their hammered mail, and cast their swords and spears to earth, and stood a naked multitude. Albion's guardian writhed in torment on the eastern sky, pale, quivering toward the brain in his glimmering eyes, teeth chattering, howling and shuddering, his legs quivering, convulsed each muscle and sinew. Sickening lay London's guardian, and the ancient mitred York, their hands on snowy hills, their ensigns sickening in the sky. The plagues creep on the burning winds, driven by flames of Orc, and by the fierce Americans rushing together in the night, driven o'er the guardians of Ireland and Scotland and Wales. They, spotted with plagues, forsook the frontiers, and their banners seared with fires of hell to form their ancient heavens with shame and woe. Hid in his caves, the bard of Albion felt the enormous plagues, and a cowl of flesh grew o'er his head, and scales on his back and ribs. And rough with black scales, all his angels fright their ancient heavens. The doors of marriage are open, and the priests in rustling scales rush into reptile coverts, hiding from the fires of work that play around the golden roofs and wreaths of fierce desire, leaving the females naked and glowing with the lusts of youth. For the female spirits of the dead, pining in bonds of religion, run from their fetters, reddening and in long-drawn arches sitting. They feel the nerves of youth renew, and desires of ancient times over their pale limbs, as a vine where the tender grape appears. Over the hills, the vales, the cities rage the red flames fierce. The heavens melted from north to south, and Urizen, who sat above all heavens, in thunder's rat, emerged his leprous head from out his holy shrine, his tears and deluge piteous falling into the deep sublime. Plagued with gray-browed snows and thunderous visages, his jealous wings waved over the deep. Weeping in dismal, howling woe, he dark descended, howling around the smitten bands, clothed in tears and trembling, shuddering cold. He stored snows, he poured forth, in his icy magazine he opened on the deep, and on the Atlantic sea, white, shivering, leprous his limbs, all over white and hoary was his visage. Weeping in dismal howlings before the stern Americans, hiding the demon red with clouds and cold mists from the earth, till angels and weak men 12 years should govern o'er the strong, and then their end should come, when France received the demon's light. Stiff shuddering shook the heavenly thrones. France, Spain, and Italy in terror viewed the bands of Albion, and the ancient guardians fainting upon the elements, smitten with their own plagues. They slow advanced to shut the 5 gates of their law-built heaven, filled with blasting fancies and with mildews of despair, with fierce disease and lust, unable to stem the fires of work. But the 5 gates were consumed, and their bolts and hinges melted, and the fierce flames burnt round the heavens and round the abodes of men.
Uren, a prophecy. 5 windows like the caverned man. Through one he breathes the air, through one he hears music of the spheres. Through one the eternal vine flourishes that he may receive the grapes. Through one can look and see small portions of the eternal world that ever groweth. Through one himself pass out what time he please, but he will not. For stolen joys are sweet, and bread eaten in secret pleasant. So sang a fairy, mocking as he sat on a streaked tulip, thinking none saw him. When he ceased, I started from the trees and caught him in my hat as a boy knocks down a butterfly. How know you this, said I. Small sir, where did you learn this song? Seeing himself in my possession, thus he answered me. My master, I am yours, command me, for I must obey. Then tell me, what is the material world? And is it dead? He, laughing, answered, I will write a book on leaves of flowers if you will feed me on love thoughts and give me now and then a cup of sparkling poetic fancies. So when I am tipsy, I'll sing to you this soft lute and show you all alive the world. When every particle of dust breathes forth its joy. I took him home in my warm bosom. As we went along, wildflowers I gathered, and he showed me each eternal flower. He laughed aloud to see them whimper because they were plucked. They hovered round me like a cloud of incense. And I came into my parlor and sat down and took my pen to write. Preludium. The nameless, shadowy female rose from out the breast of Orc, her snaky hair brandishing in the winds of Enetharmon, and thus her voice arose. O Mother Enetharmon, wilt thou bring forth other sons to cause my name to vanish, that my place may not be found? For I am faint with travel. Like the dark cloud dispersed in the day of dismal thunder, my roots are brandished in the heavens. My fruits in earth beneath surge, foam, and labor into life, firstborn and first consumed, consumed and consuming. Then why shouldst thou, accursed mother, bring me into life? I wrap my turban of thick clouds around my laboring head and fold the sheety waters as a mantle around my limbs, yet the red sun and moon and all the overflowing stars rain down prolific pains. Unwilling, I look up to heaven, unwilling, count the stars. Sitting in fathomless abyss of my immortal shrine, I seize their burning power and bring forth howling terrors, all-devouring fiery kings, devouring and devoured, roaming on dark and desolate mountains and forests of eternal death, shrieking in hollow trees. Ah, Mother Enetharmon, stamp not with solid form this vigorous prodigy of fires. I bring forth my teeming bosom myriads of flames, and thou dost stamp them with a signet. Then they roam abroad and leave me void as death. Ah, I am drowned in shady woe and visionary joy. And who shall bind the infinite with an eternal band, to compass it with swaddling bands? And who shall cherish it with milk and honey? I see it smile, and I roll inward, and my voice is past. She ceased, and rolled her shady clouds into the secret place. A prophecy. The deep of winter came. What time the secret child descended through the orient gates of the eternal day, war ceased, and all the troops like shadows fled to their abodes. Then Enetharmon saw her sons and daughters rise around. Like pearly clouds they meet together in the crystal house, and Los, possessor of the moon, joyed in the peaceful night, thus speaking while his numerous sons shook the bright fiery wings. Again the night has come, that strong Urthona takes his rest, and Urizen, unloosed from chains, glows like a meteor in the distant north. Stretch forth your hands and strike the elemental strings. Awake the thunders of the deep. The shrill winds wake till all the sons of Urizen look out in envy Los, seize all the spirits of life and bind their warbling joys to our loud strings. Find all the nourishing sweets of earth to give us bliss, that we may drink the sparkling wine of Los. And let us laugh at war, despising toil and care, because the days and nights of joy in lucky hours renew. Arise, O Orc, from thy deep den, firstborn of Enetharmon. Arise, and we will crown thy head with garlands of the ruddy vine, for now thou art bound, and I may see thee in the hour of bliss, my eldest born. The horrid demon rose, surrounded with red stars of fire, whirling about in furious circles around the immortal fiend. Then Enetharmon down, descending into his red light, and thus her voice rose to her children. The distant heavens replied. Now comes the night of Enetharmon's joy. Who shall I call? Who shall I send, that woman, lovely woman, may have dominion? Arise, O Rintra, thee I call, and Palamambron, thee, go, tell the human race that woman's love is sin, that all eternal life awaits the worms of 60 winters in an allegorical abode where existence hath never come. Forbid all joy, and from her childhood shall the little female spread nets in every secret path. My weary eyelids draw toward the evening, my bliss is yet but new. Arise, O Rintra, eldest born, second to none but Orc. O lion Rintra, raise thy fury from the forest black. Bring Palamambron, horned priest skipping upon the mountains, and silent Ilitria, the silver-bowed queen. Rintra, where hast thou hid thy bride? Weeps she in desert shades? Alas, my Rintra, bring the lovely jealous Ocalathrion. Arise, my son, bring all thy brethren. O thou king of fire, prince of the sun, I see thee with thy innumerable race, thick as summer stars, but each ramping his golden mane shakes, and thine eyes rejoice because of strength, O Rintra, furious king. And the Tharmon slept. 1800 years, man was a dream, the night of nature and their harps unstrung. She slept in middle of her nightly song, 1800 years of female dream. Shadows of men in fleeting bands upon the winds divide the heavens of Europe, till Albion's angel, smitten with his own plagues, fled with his bands. But the cloud bears hard on Albion's shore, filled with immortal demons of futurity. In council gather the smitten angels of Albion. The cloud bears hard upon the council house, down rushing on the heads of Albion's angels. 1 hour they lay buried beneath the ruins of that hall, but as the stars rise from the salt lake, they arise in pain, in troubled mists o'erclouded by the terrors of struggling times. In thoughts perturbed they rose from the bright ruins, silent, following the fiery king, who sought his ancient temple, serpent-formed, that stretches out its shady length along the island white. Round him rolled his clouds of war. Silent the angel went along the infinite shores of Thames. To golden Verulam, there stand the venerable porches, the high towering rear. Their oak-surrounded pillars formed of massy stones, uncut with tool, precious stones, such eternal in the heavens, with tool of colors 12, few known on earth, give light in the opaque, placed in the order of the stars when the 5 senses whelmed in deluge o'er the earth-born man, then turned the fluxal eyes into 2 stationary orbs, concentrating all things. The ever-varying spiral ascent to the heavens of heavens were bended downward, and the nostrils' golden gates shut, turned outward, barred and petrified against the infinite. Thought changed the infinite to a serpent, that which pitieth through a devouring flame, and man fled from its face and hid in forests of night. Then all the eternal forests were divided into earths, rolling in circles of space that like an ocean rushed and overwhelmed all except this finite wall of flesh. Then was the serpent temple formed, image of infinite shut up in finite resolutions, and man became an angel, heaven a mighty circle turning, God a tyrant crowned. Now arrived the guardian of the southern porch, that planted thick with trees of blackened leaf and in a veil, obscure and closed the stone of night, oblique it stood, o'erhung with purple flowers and berries red, image of that sweet south, once open to the heavens and elevated on the human neck. Now overgrown with hair and covered with a wide stony roof, downward to sunk beneath the attractive north, that round the feet, a raging whirlpool, draws the dizzying inquirer to his grave. Albion's angel rose upon the stone of night. He saw Urizen on the Atlantic and his brazen book. The kings and priests had copied on earth, expanded from north to south. And the clouds and fires pale rolled around in the night of Inatharmon. Round Albion's cliffs and London's walls, still Inatharmon slept. Rolling volumes of gray mist involved churches, palaces, towers, for Urizen unclasped his book, feeding his soul with pity. The youth of England, hid in gloom, cursed the pained heavens, compelled into the deadly night to see the form of Albion's angel. Their parents brought them forth, and aged ignorance preaches, canting on a vast rock received by those senses that are closed from thought. Bleak, dark, abrupt it stands and overshadows London city. They saw his bony feet on the rock, the flesh consumed in flames, until the serpent temple lifted above, shadowing the island white. They heard the voice of Albion's angel howling in flames of Orc, seeking the trump of the last doom. Above the rest, the howl was heard from Westminster. Louder and louder, the guardian of the secret codes forsook his ancient mansions, driven out by the flames of Orc. His furred robes and false locks adhered and grew one with his flesh and nerves, and veins shot through them with dismal torment sick. Hanging upon the wind, he fled, groveling along the great George Street. To the park gate, all the soldiers fled from his sight. He dragged his torments to the wilderness. Thus was the howl through Europe. For Orc rejoiced to hear the howling shadows. But Palamambron shot his lightning, trenching down his wide back, and Rintra hung with all his legions in the nether deep. Initharmon laughed in her sleep to see, O woman's triumph. Every house a den, every man bound. The shadows are filled with specters, and the windows wove over with curses of iron. Over the doors, thou shalt not, and over the chimneys, fear is written. With bands of iron round their necks and fastened into the walls, the citizens in leaden gears, the inhabitants of suburbs, walk heavy. Soft and bent are the bones of villagers. Between the clouds of Urzin, the flames of Orc rolls heavy around the limbs of Albion's guardian. His flesh consuming howlings and hissings, shrieks and groans and voices of despair arise around in the cloudy heavens of Albion, furious. The red-limbed angel seized in horror and torment the trump of the last doom, but he could not blow the iron tube. Thrice he essayed, presumptuous, to awake the dead to judgment. A mighty spirit leaped from the land of Albion, named Newton. He seized the trump and blowed the enormous blast. Yellow as leaves of autumn, the myriads of angelic hosts fell through the wintry sky, seeking the graves, rattling their hollow bones and howling and lamentations. Then Initharmon woke, nor knew that she had slept, and 1,800 years were fled as if they had not been. She called her sons and daughters to the sports of night within her crystal house, and thus her song proceeds, Arise, Inithinus. Though the earthworm call, let him call in vain, till the night of holy shadows and human solitude is past. Infinitus, queen of the waters, how thou shinest in the sky, my daughter, how do I rejoice? For thy children flock around as the gay fishes on the waves, where the cold moon drinks the dew. Inithus, thou art sweet, and comforts my fainting soul, for now thy waters warble round the feet of Initharmon. Mantaversian, I behold thee flaming in my halls, light of thy mother's soul. I see the eagles round, the golden wings are my delight, and thy flames are soft delusion. Where is my luring bird of Eden? Lutha, silent love, Lutha, the many-colored bow that lights upon thy wings, soft soul of flowers. Lutha, sweet, smiling pestilence, I see thy blushing light, thy daughters many changing, revolve like sweet perfumes ascending. O Lutha, silken queen, where is the youthful Etememnon, prince of the pearly dews? O Etememnon, wilt thou leave thy mother Etememnon? Alone I see thee crystal form, floating upon the bosom air, with lineaments of gratified desire, my Antimon. The 7 churches of Lutha seek thy love. I hear the soft Uthon in Initharmon's tents. Why wilt thou give up woman's secrecy, my melancholy child? Between 2 moments bliss is ripped. O Theotormon, robbed of joy, I see thy salt tears flow down the steps of my crystal house. Sotha and Thirolotha, secret dwellers of dreamful caves, arise and please the horrent fiend with your melodious songs. Still all your thunderous golden hoofed and bind horses black. Orc, smile upon my children. Smile, son of my afflictions. Arise, O Orc, and give our mountains joy of thy red light. She ceased, for all were forth at sport beneath the solemn moon, waking the stars of Urizen with their immortal songs, that nature felt through all her pores their enormous revelry. Till morning oped the eastern gate, then everyone fled to his station, and Initharmon wept. But terrible Orc, when he beheld the morning in the east, shot from the heights of Initharmon, and in the vineyard of red France appeared the light of his fury. The sun glowed fiery red, the furious terrors flew around on golden chariots raging with red wheels, dropping with blood. The lions lashed their wrathful tails, the tigers couch upon the prey and suck the ruddy tide. And Initharmon groans and cries in anguish and dismay. Then Los arose, his head he reared in snaky thunders clad, and with a cry that shook all nature to the utmost pole, called all his sons to the strife of blood.
We're going to close with the shorter piece, the Song of Los. Africa. I will sing you a song of Los, the eternal prophet. He sung it to 4 harps at the tables of eternity in heart-formed Africa. Urizen faded, Ariston shuddered, and thus the song began. Adam stood in the Garden of Eden, and Noah on the mountains of Ararat. They saw Urizen give his laws to the nation by the hands of the children of Los. Adam shuddered, Noah faded. Black grew the sunny African when Rintra gave abstract philosophy to Brahma in the east. Night spoke to the cloud, lo, these human-formed spirits in smiling hypocrisy war against one another, so let them war on, slaves to the eternal elements. Noah shrunk beneath the waters. Abram fled in fires from Chaldea. Moses beheld upon Mount Sinai forms of dark delusion. To Trismegistus, Alambron gave an abstract law to Pythagoras, Socrates, and Plato. Times roll it on o'er all the sons of Har. Time after time, Orc on Mount Atlas howled, chained down with the chain of jealousy. Then Owathoan hovered over Judah and Jerusalem, and Jesus heard her voice, a man of sorrows. He received a gospel from wretched Theotorma. The human race began to wither, for the healthy built secluded places, fearing the joys of love, and the diseased only propagated. So Antimon called up Lutha from her valleys of delight, and to Muhammad a loose Bible gave. But in the north to Odin, Sotha gave a code of war, because of Diralata thinking to reclaim his joy. These were the churches, hospitals, castles, palaces like nets and gins and traps to catch the joys of eternity, and all the rest a desert, till like a dream eternity was obliterated and erased. Since that dread day when Har and Heva fled, because their brethren and sisters lived in war and lust, and as they fled they shrunk into 2 narrow doleful forms, creeping in reptile flesh upon the bosom of the ground, and all the vast of nature shrunk before their shrunken eyes. Thus the terrible race of Los and Enatharmon gave laws and religions to the sons of Har, binding them more and more to earth, closing and restraining, till a philosophy of 5 senses was complete. Urizen wept and gave it into the hands of Newton and Locke. Clouds roll heavy upon the Alps round Rousseau and Voltaire, and on the mountains of Lebanon round the deceased gods of Asia, and on the deserts of Africa round the fallen angels. The guardian prince of Albion burns in his nightly tent. Asia. The kings of Asia heard the howl rise up from Europe, and each ran out from his web, from his ancient woven den, for the darkness of Asia was startled at the thick flaming, thought-creating fires of Orc. And the kings of Asia stood and cried in bitterness of soul, shall not the king call for famine from the heath, nor the priest for pestilence from the fen, to restrain, to dismay, to thin the inhabitants of mountain and plain, in the day of full-feeding prosperity and the night of delicious songs? Shall not the counselor throw his curb of poverty upon the laborious, to fix the price of labor, to invent allegoric riches? And the privy admonishers of men call for fires in the city, for heaps of smoking ruins in the night of prosperity and wantonness, to turn man from his path, to restrain the child from the womb, to cut off the bread from the city, that the remnant may learn to obey, that the pride of the heart may fail, that the lust of the eyes may be quenched, that the delicate ear in its infancy may be dulled, and the nostrils closed up, to teach mortal worms the path that leads from the gates of the grave. Urizen heard them cry, and his shuddering, waving wings went enormous above the red flames, drawing clouds of despair through the heavens of Europe as he went. And his books of brass, iron, and gold melted over the land as he flew, heavy waving, howling, weeping. And he stood over Judea and stayed in his ancient place and stretched his clouds over Jerusalem. For Adam, a moldering skeleton lay bleached on the Garden of Eden, and Noah as white as snow on the mountains of Ararat. Then the thunders of Urizen bellowed aloud from his woven darkness above. Orc, raging in European darkness, arose like a pillar of fire above the Alps, like a serpent of fiery flame. The sullen earth shrunk. Forth for the dead dust, rattling bones to bones join. Shaking, convulsed, the shivering clay breathes, and all flesh naked stands, fathers and friends, mothers and infants, kings and warriors. The grave shrieks with delight and shakes her hollow womb and clasps the solid stem. Her bosom swells with wild desire, and milk and blood and glandus wine in rivers rush and shout and dance on mountain, dale, and plain. The song of Los is ended. Urizen wept. Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you, Tim, for your performances, and thank you all for joining us here for a Blake afternoon.